The ink had barely dried on Clara Vaughn's name when Silas Crenshaw slammed the ledger shut and announced she was now his property to do with as he pleased. The year was 1852, and in Hangtown, California, debts were paid one way or another, even if it meant trading human lives like currency across a bar stained with whiskey and broken promises. Clara stood in the corner of the Golden Nugget Saloon, her hands trembling as she clutched the worn fabric of her only dress. The room smelled of tobacco smoke, unwashed bodies, and desperation. She had watched her father drink himself into oblivion for 3 weeks straight after the claim he had staked turned out to be nothing but worthless rock and false hope. Then he had simply disappeared one morning, leaving her with a debt of $200 that she had no way to pay. Silas Crenshaw was a man whose belly preceded him into every room, his face perpetually red from drink and anger. He owned the Saloon, the boarding house next door, and half the miners' souls in Hangtown. When Clara's father vanished, Silas had come collecting, and when she could not produce the money, he had done what men like him always did. He took what he wanted. "She will work upstairs," Silas declared to the room full of miners and drifters, his meaty hand gesturing toward the narrow staircase that led to the rooms where women sold the only thing they had left. "Pretty thing like her will have that debt paid off in no time, might even turn a profit." Clara felt bile rise in her throat. She was 19 years old, and she had come to California with dreams that now seemed as distant as the East Coast home she had left behind. Her mother had died of fever on the wagon train west, and her father had promised her a better life. Instead, he had delivered her to this moment, where strange men looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. "Now hold on just a minute." The voice came from the back of the room, deep and steady, cutting through the raucous laughter and crude comments like a knife through butter. The crowd parted, and Clara saw him for the first time. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work rather than fat. His clothes were dusty from travel, a dark shirt and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. A black hat shadowed his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and eyes that were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds rolling across a summer sky. He wore a gun on his hip, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "And who the hell are you?" Silas demanded, his good humor evaporating like morning dew under the California sun. "Name's Pierce Vaughn," the stranger said, moving through the crowd with an easy confidence. "And I heard you say that girl there has a debt of $200. "That's right," Silas said, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's it to you?" Pierce reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather pouch. He loosened the drawstring and poured a cascade of gold coins onto the bar, the metal ringing against the scarred wood. Clara's eyes widened. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. "I will settle the debt," Pierce said simply. The saloon fell silent. Even the piano player in the corner stopped his discordant melody. Silas stared at the gold, and Clara could see the wheels turning behind his piggy eyes. He licked his lips, calculating. 200 exactly, Pierce said, counting out the coins with precise movements. "That clears the debt, according to what you just said." "Well now," Silas said slowly, "that might have been the debt when her father left, but there's interest to consider. Room and board for the past 3 weeks. That brings the total to, say, 300. Pierce's jaw tightened, and for a moment Clara thought he might reach for his gun. Instead, he counted out another $100 in gold and pushed it across the bar. 300, he said, his voice hard as granite. "Now fetch that ledger and tear out her name." Silas hesitated, clearly wanting to push for more, but something in Pierce's eyes made him reconsider. He pulled the heavy ledger from under the bar and flipped it open to the most recent page. There, written in Silas's cramped hand, was Clara's name along with the details of her father's debt. Pierce took the ledger from Silas's hands before the saloon keeper could react. He found the page, ripped it cleanly from the binding, and held it up for the entire room to see. Then he crumpled it in his fist and dropped it to the floor. "She is free and clear," Pierce announced. "Anyone here have a problem with that?" The miners and drifters exchanged glances but said nothing. Pierce Vaughn might be a stranger, but he was clearly not a man to be trifled with. Silas's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but he gathered up the gold coins and said nothing more. Pierce turned to Clara, and for the first time their eyes met fully. She felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter of something she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or simply relief at being delivered from a nightmare. "You have a place to go?" Pierce asked, his voice gentler now. Clara shook her head. "No, sir. My father and I were staying in the boarding house, but without money." "Get your things," Pierce said, "whatever you have." "I will wait." Clara did not need to be told twice. She hurried up the stairs to the small room she had shared with her father, gathering her few possessions into a canvas bag. A spare dress, her mother's Bible, a small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world fit into one bag, light enough to carry with one hand. When she came back downstairs, Pierce was waiting by the door. He had not moved, his stance relaxed but alert, like a wolf watching for danger. He nodded when he saw her and held the door open. The California sun was bright after the dim interior of the saloon, and Clara blinked against the glare. Hangtown's Main Street was bustling with activity. Miners trudged toward the diggings with pans and pickaxes. Merchants hawked their wares from makeshift storefronts. Mule teams hauled timber and supplies. Everyone was chasing the same dream of gold, willing to sacrifice everything for the chance at fortune. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice small. Pierce looked down at her, and she was struck again by the intensity of those gray eyes. "That depends on you, Miss Vaughn," she said. "Clara Vaughn." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Same last name, that's interesting." "It was my mother's maiden name," Clara explained. "When she married my father, she kept it as my middle name. Then my father insisted I use it as my surname when we came west. He said it sounded more respectable. Coincidence, I suppose." Pierce nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Vaughn, I paid your debt because no woman should be sold like cattle. But I will not pretend to own you now. You are free to do as you please. I can stake you to a room at the boarding house for a few days while you figure out what comes next, or if you have somewhere else you want to go, I will see you get there safely." Clara looked at him with confusion. "You spent $300 on a stranger and want nothing in return." "I want you to be free," Pierce said simply. "That is all." She felt tears prick at her eyes, the first real emotion she had allowed herself to feel since her father's disappearance. "Why would you do this?" Pierce was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My mother was sold to pay a debt when I was a boy," he said finally. "Different circumstances, but the same result. I could not save her. Maybe I can save you." Clara's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "What happened to her?" "She died," Pierce said flatly. 3 years later, worked to death in a factory back east. I was 12 when I got word. I have been on my own ever since." "I am so sorry," Clara whispered. Pierce shook his head. "Past is past. Question is, what do you want to do now?" Clara thought about it. She could take his offer of a few days at the boarding house, try to find work as a seamstress or laundress. But Hangtown was a rough place, and she knew that Silas Crenshaw would not forget this humiliation. He would find ways to make her life difficult, and there would be other men who would see a young woman alone as an opportunity. "I have no family," she said slowly. "No skills that would earn me a living here. If you are willing, I would like to travel with you until I can find a place where I might make a new start. I can cook and clean, and I am a hard worker. I would earn my keep." Pierce studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She needed him to see that she was serious, that she was not simply trading one form of dependence for another. "I am headed north," Pierce said finally, "up toward Oregon Territory. I have a claim up there, a piece of land I have been working for the past 2 years. It is not much yet, but it is mine. The journey will be hard and there are no guarantees of safety. If you are willing to take that risk, you can come with me, but I want to be clear about the terms. You will work for your passage, and when we reach Oregon, you will have earned enough stake to start fresh on your own if that is what you want. I will not hold you to anything beyond that." "When do we leave?" Clara asked. Pierce's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "First light tomorrow. I need to pick up supplies and another horse. Can you ride?" "I learned on the wagon train west," Clara said. "I am not an expert, but I can stay in the saddle." "Good enough," Pierce said. "Come on. Let us get you settled for the night, and tomorrow we will put Hangtown behind us." They walked down the muddy street toward a more respectable boarding house on the edge of town, run by a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Henderson. Pierce paid for a room for Clara and handed her enough money to buy a proper traveling dress and supplies for the journey. "Meet me at the livery stable at dawn," he said. "Do not be late." Clara watched him walk away. This mysterious man who had appeared like something out of a fever dream and changed the course of her life in a matter of minutes. She did not know if she was being foolish or wise, but she knew that staying in Hangtown meant a slow death of the spirit if not the body. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. That night, Clara barely slept. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of Hangtown settling down for the night. Gunshots echoed in the distance, followed by raucous laughter. Somewhere a woman was crying, the sound muffled but heartbreaking. Clara pulled her mother's Bible from her bag and held it close, whispering a prayer of thanks and hope. She rose before dawn, washing in the cold water from the basin and dressing in the new traveling clothes she had purchased the day before. The dress was a practical brown wool, sturdy enough for the trail. She had also bought a warm cloak, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. She looked older, more serious, like someone who had been forced to grow up overnight. Pierce was already at the livery stable when she arrived, checking the saddle on a gray mare. He looked up when he heard her approach and nodded with approval. "This is Daisy," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She is gentle but has plenty of stamina. She will serve you well." "Thank you," Clara said, running her hand along Daisy's soft muzzle. The horse whickered softly, and Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. Pierce's own horse was a large buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. He had loaded both horses with supplies, carefully balanced to distribute the weight evenly. Clara could see bedrolls, cooking equipment, food stores, ammunition, and various other necessities for the trail. "Can you handle a rifle?" Pierce asked as he helped Clara mount Daisy. "My father taught me to shoot," Clara said. "I am not an expert marksman, but I can hit what I am aiming at if it is not too far away." Pierce pulled a rifle from his own horse and handed it up to her, along with a leather satchel of ammunition. "Keep this close. We will be traveling through territory where trouble can find you quick. I hope we will not need it, but better to be prepared." Clara secured the rifle in the scabbard attached to her saddle and nodded. Her heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She was really doing this, leaving behind everything familiar for the great unknown. They rode out of Hangtown as the sun broke over the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp and cool, smelling of pine and earth. Clara took one last look at the rough mining town and then fixed her eyes firmly forward. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. The first few days of travel were harder than Clara had anticipated. She quickly learned that there was a vast difference between sitting on a horse for an hour and spending all day in the saddle. By the end of the first day, every muscle in her body ached, and she had blisters forming on her thighs despite her sturdy dress. But she gritted her teeth and said nothing, determined to prove that she could handle whatever the journey threw at her. Pierce was a man of few words, but Clara found that she did not mind the silence. There was something peaceful about riding through the wilderness with only the sound of hoofbeats and bird calls for company. When they did talk, Pierce proved to be an intelligent and thoughtful companion. He pointed out landmarks and wildlife, teaching her about the land they were traveling through. He had a deep respect for nature that Clara found appealing, treating the wilderness as something to be appreciated rather than conquered. They camped that first night beside a clear stream, the water rushing over smooth stones with a musical quality. Pierce showed Clara how to make camp properly, where to place the bedrolls for maximum comfort and safety, how to build a fire that would burn steady through the night without consuming too much wood. Clara prepared their dinner, simple fare of beans and salt pork, but Pierce ate with obvious appreciation. "You said you could cook," Pierce said, wiping his plate clean with a piece of hardtack. "You did not exaggerate." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest at the simple compliment. "My mother was an excellent cook. She taught me everything she knew before she passed." "Tell me about her," Pierce said, leaning back against his saddle and gazing up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Clara was surprised by the request, but found herself wanting to share. She was kind and patient, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. She never complained, even when things were hard. When we were on the wagon train and people were dying of cholera and fever, she nursed the sick without thought for her own safety. I think that is how she caught the fever that killed her. She gave her life caring for others. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Pierce said quietly. "She was," Clara agreed. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you." Pierce glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Why do you say that?" "Because you are like her," Clara said simply. "Kind beneath the rough exterior, willing to help others even when it costs you something." Pierce looked away, and Clara thought she saw color rise in his cheeks, though it might have been a trick of the firelight. "I am not particularly kind, Miss Vaughn. I simply try to do what is right when I can." "That is the definition of kindness, Mr. Vaughn," Clara said softly. He met her eyes then, and something passed between them, an understanding or recognition that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Pierce cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. "We should get some rest," he said. "We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." Clara nodded and moved to her bedroll, which Pierce had placed a respectful distance from his own. She lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin, watching the stars wheel overhead. She could hear Pierce moving around the camp, checking the horses and making sure the fire was properly banked for the night. "Mr. Vaughn," Clara called softly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything." There was a pause, and then his voice came back, rough with an emotion she could not identify. "You are welcome, Miss Vaughn. Sleep well." The days blended into a rhythm that Clara found oddly comforting. They rose with the sun, broke camp efficiently, and rode until mid-afternoon when they would stop to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Then they would ride until early evening, making camp with enough daylight left to prepare a hot meal and tend to necessary chores. Pierce was an excellent teacher, showing Clara how to track game, identify edible plants, and read the signs of changing weather. She soaked up every bit of knowledge like parched earth drinking in rain. They had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks when they encountered their first real trouble. They were following a narrow trail through dense forest when Pierce suddenly held up his hand, signaling Clara to stop. She reined in Daisy and waited, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle. "What is it?" she whispered. "Smoke," Pierce said, his voice low. "And not from a campfire. Something is burning." They proceeded cautiously, and soon Clara could smell it too, the acrid scent of burning wood and something else, something that made her stomach turn. They emerged from the trees to find the smoldering remains of what had once been a small homestead. The cabin was nothing but charred beams and ash. The barn had fared slightly better, but the door hung open on broken hinges. Pierce dismounted and drew his gun, moving toward the ruins with practiced caution. Clara stayed on her horse, her eyes scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Hello," Pierce called out. "Is anyone here?" A sound came from the barn, a soft whimper that made Clara's blood run cold. Pierce moved quickly toward the sound, and Clara slid from Daisy's back to follow him. Inside the barn, huddled in a corner beneath a torn blanket, they found a young boy. He could not have been more than 8 years old, his face streaked with soot and tears. "It is all right," Pierce said gently, holstering his gun and kneeling down to the child's level. "We are here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" The boy stared at them with wide, terrified eyes. "Raiders," he whispered. "They came yesterday. They took Ma and Pa. They burned everything." Clara felt rage and grief wash over her in equal measure. She knelt beside Pierce and reached out slowly, letting the boy see that she meant no harm. "What is your name, sweetheart?" "Tommy," the boy said, his voice breaking. "Tommy Garrett." "Well, Tommy, my name is Clara and this is Pierce. We are going to take care of you now. Are you hurt?" Tommy shook his head. "I hid when they came. Pa told me to hide in the hayloft and not make a sound no matter what. I heard Ma screaming. I wanted to help, but I was too scared." "You did exactly right," Pierce said firmly. "Your pa gave you good advice. Being brave does not mean being foolish. You survived, and that is what matters." They searched the ruins but found no trace of Tommy's parents beyond the obvious signs of violence. Pierce's face was grim as he helped Clara gather what few supplies could be salvaged from the wreckage. "We need to report this to the nearest town," Pierce said quietly when they were out of Tommy's earshot. "And we need to find someone who can take care of the boy." "He can come with us," Clara said immediately. Pierce looked at her with surprise. "Clara, we are barely managing with just the 2 of us. Taking on a child is a serious responsibility." "What is the alternative?" Clara demanded. "We leave him at some town where he has no family, no one who cares about him. He has already lost everything. The least we can do is make sure he is safe." Pierce studied her for a long moment, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "You have a good heart, Miss Vaughn." "A stubborn one, but good." "Is that a yes?" Clara asked. "That is a yes," Pierce agreed. "But you are going to be the one who explains this to him. I have no experience with children." Clara walked back to where Tommy was sitting on a crate, staring at the ruins of his home with blank eyes. She sat down beside him and took his small hand in hers. "Tommy, we are headed north to Oregon Territory. It is a long journey, but there are good people there, wide open spaces, and the chance for a new start. Pierce and I would like you to come with us. When we get there, we will find you a good home with people who will care for you. Or, if you would rather, we can take you to the nearest town and try to find family there. What would you like to do?" Tommy looked up at her with those heartbreaking eyes. "I do not have any other family." It was just Ma and Pa and me. Can I stay with you and Mr. Pierce? Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. Yes, sweetheart, you can stay with us. Pierce fashioned a makeshift saddle arrangement that allowed Tommy to ride safely on the buckskin gelding with him. The boy was quiet and withdrawn, but he clung to Pierce with a desperation that spoke volumes about his terror of being left alone. They buried what remained of the Garrett homestead and said a prayer over the ashes before moving on. Having Tommy with them changed the dynamic of their journey in ways both challenging and surprisingly pleasant. The boy gradually began to come out of his shell, asking questions about everything he saw and marveling at the wonders of the wilderness around them. Pierce proved to be surprisingly good with the child, patient and kind in a way that made Clara see him in a new light. One evening, after they had made camp and Tommy was sound asleep in his bedroll, Clara and Pierce sat by the fire talking in low voices. "You are good with him," Clara observed, watching Pierce whittle a small wooden horse for Tommy to play with. "I remember what it was like to be alone and scared," Pierce said without looking up from his carving. "If someone had shown me kindness back then, maybe things would have been different." "Tell me about your life," Clara said gently. "I have shared so much of mine, but I know so little about you." Pierce was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then he set down his knife and looked into the fire, his face shadowed and hard. "I grew up in New York City," he began. "My father was a drunk who disappeared when I was 5. My mother worked herself to the bone trying to keep us fed and clothed. When I was 10, she borrowed money from the wrong people to pay for a doctor when I got sick with scarlet fever. When she could not pay them back, they sold her labor contract to a textile mill. The work was brutal, dangerous. 3 years later, she was crushed by a machine that should have been repaired months before." Clara reached out and placed her hand over his. Pierce looked down at their joined hands with something like wonder. "I was on the streets after that," Pierce continued. "Did whatever I had to do to survive. Worked on the docks, ran errands for gangs, stole when I was desperate enough. Then I met a man named William Hart. He was a former soldier, and he saw something in me worth saving. He taught me to read and write, taught me about honor and integrity. When he died, he left me a little money, enough to head west and start over. I have been trying to live up to his example ever since." "He would be proud of you," Clara said softly. "I am proud of you." Pierce looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. There was such intensity in his gaze, such naked longing that it made her dizzy. He raised his hand slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His calloused fingers were gentle against her skin. "Clara," he said, her name a rough whisper, "I need you to know that I did not plan this. When I paid your debt, I had no expectations, no ulterior motives. But I would be lying if I said my feelings have not changed. You are brave and kind and strong in ways I did not know were possible. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you are thinking, wanting to make you smile. If that makes you uncomfortable, please tell me, and I will keep my distance." Clara's heart was racing. She realized that she had been falling for Pierce Vaughn since the moment he stood up to Silas Crenshaw and tore her name from that ledger. Every day on the trail had deepened her affection for him, revealed new facets of his character that made her admire and respect him even more. But she had not dared to hope that he might feel the same way. "It does not make me uncomfortable," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "It makes me happy. I care for you too, Pierce, more than I probably should given how recently we met." Pierce smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face and made him look years younger. "Maybe we are both crazy," he said, "but I do not think time matters when something feels this right. He leaned forward slowly, and Clara met him halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Clara felt warmth spread through her entire body, a sense of rightness and belonging that she had not felt since before her mother died. When they finally pulled apart, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I am not good with pretty words," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that you mean something to me, something important. I know we agreed that when we reach Oregon you would be free to go your own way, but I am hoping you might consider staying with me." "I have been hoping you would ask," Clara admitted, feeling a smile spread across her face. "Yes, Pierce, I will stay with you. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." They sat together by the fire, Clara's head resting on Pierce's shoulder, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Tommy slept peacefully nearby, and the horses grazed contentedly in the meadow. For the first time since her mother's death, Clara felt truly at peace. She had found something she thought was lost forever, a future worth looking forward to. The journey north continued through changing landscapes. They left the mountains behind and traveled through rolling hills covered in wildflowers. They forded rivers and crossed open plains where herds of elk grazed in the distance. Tommy blossomed under their care, his natural curiosity and enthusiasm for life returning day by day. He became their little helper, fetching water, gathering firewood, and keeping watch for interesting plants and animals. One afternoon, they reached a trading post run by a grizzled old trapper named Ezekiel Stone. He welcomed them warmly, clearly starved for company and news from the outside world. Over dinner, Pierce told him about finding Tommy and the burned homestead. Ezekiel's face darkened. "You are not the first to report such things," he said grimly. "There is a gang operating in these parts, led by a man called Red Jack Murphy. They have been raiding homesteads, stealing what they can and burning the rest. The law has been trying to catch them for months, but they always seem to stay one step ahead." "What happened to the people they take?" Clara asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. "Depends," Ezekiel said. "Men usually turn up dead a few days later. Women and children sometimes disappear entirely. There is talk of them being sold to unscrupulous traders, but nobody has been able to prove it." Clara felt sick. Tommy's parents were likely already dead, and there was nothing they could have done to prevent it. But the knowledge that such evil existed in the world, that people could be bought and sold like commodities, filled her with rage. She had escaped that fate herself only through Pierce's intervention. How many others were not so lucky? "Is there anything we can do to help?" Pierce asked. Ezekiel shook his head. "Best thing you can do is keep moving and stay alert. Red Jack and his men are dangerous. They would not think twice about killing anyone who got in their way." They stayed at the trading post for 2 days, resting the horses and replenishing their supplies. Ezekiel took a particular liking to Tommy, teaching him how to play checkers and telling him outrageous stories about his years as a mountain man. Clara was grateful for the respite, but she was also eager to continue their journey. Every day brought them closer to Oregon and the new life waiting there. On the morning of their departure, Ezekiel pulled Pierce aside for a private conversation. Clara saw them talking in low, serious tones, and then Ezekiel handed Pierce what looked like a hand-drawn map. Pierce studied it carefully before tucking it into his jacket. "What was that about?" Clara asked as they rode away from the trading post. "Ezekiel thinks he knows where Red Jack's gang might be holed up," Pierce said. "He gave me a map to their suspected location and said that if I happened to run into any lawmen on the trail, I should pass along the information." "Are we going to seek them out?" Clara asked, alarm rising in her chest. "Absolutely not," Pierce said firmly. "Our priority is getting to Oregon safely. We are not heroes, and I will not risk your life or Tommy's by trying to take on a gang of killers. If we encounter law enforcement, I will share what we know. Otherwise, we stay as far away from Red Jack Murphy as possible." Clara nodded, relieved by his answer. She had seen enough violence and cruelty for one lifetime. All she wanted now was peace and the chance to build a life with Pierce. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. They had been traveling for 3 more days when they came across a scene that made Pierce pull up short. A wagon sat in the middle of the trail, one wheel broken, and the contents scattered across the ground. A woman was trying to repair the wheel while 2 small children huddled nearby, their faces streaked with tears. Pierce and Clara exchanged a glance, and then Pierce nudged his horse forward. "You need assistance, madam." The woman looked up, and Clara saw the fear in her eyes. She was young, probably no more than 25, with auburn hair and a dress that had once been fine but was now travel-stained and torn. "Please," the woman said, her voice desperate. "My husband went for help hours ago, but he has not returned. I cannot fix this wheel on my own, and night is coming. I am so afraid." Pierce dismounted and examined the broken wheel. "The axle is cracked," he said after a moment. "It is not something that can be fixed easily out here. Do you have a spare?" The woman shook her head. "No, we used our spare 3 days ago when we hit a rock. My husband said we would make do until we reached the next town." "Where were you headed?" Clara asked, dismounting from Daisy and approaching the children. They could not have been more than 4 and 6 years old, clearly exhausted and frightened. "Fort Bridger," the woman said. "We are meeting up with a wagon train that is supposed to depart for California next week. If we miss it, we will have to wait until spring for another." Pierce rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Fort Bridger is 2 days' ride from here at a steady pace. With a broken wagon and children on foot, it would take you a week or more, assuming you do not run into trouble along the way. What choice do I have?" the woman asked, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I cannot leave my husband's wagon. Everything we own is here." Clara looked at Pierce, and she could see him wrestling with the decision. They could leave these people to their fate, continue on to Oregon without getting involved. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But it was not the right choice, and both of them knew it. "We will help you," Pierce said finally. "Clara and I will ride to Fort Bridger and find your husband. If he is there, we will send back help. If not, we will hire someone to come out and repair the wagon. In the meantime, you should make camp here and stay with your children. Keep a fire burning at all times and keep your rifle close." The woman's face flooded with relief. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." "My name is Margaret Williams." "Pierce Vaughn," Pierce said, tipping his hat. "This is Clara Vaughn and young Tommy Garrett." They helped Margaret set up a proper camp, and Pierce left her with extra ammunition and food from their supplies. Tommy, after some persuasion, agreed to stay with Margaret and her children. He had become protective of the younger kids, and seemed to relish the responsibility of helping to watch over them. Clara and Pierce set out for Fort Bridger at first light, pushing their horses hard to cover the distance quickly. They rode in companionable silence for the most part, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara found herself thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. If Silas Crenshaw had not decided to collect on her father's debt that particular day, if Pierce had not walked into the Golden Nugget Saloon at that exact moment, she would likely be living a nightmare right now. Instead, she was riding through beautiful country with a man she was falling more in love with every day. "What are you thinking about?" Pierce asked, glancing over at her. "How lucky I am," Clara said honestly. "How different things could have been." "I was thinking the same thing," Pierce admitted. "I almost did not stop in Hangtown. I was low on supplies, but I thought about pushing on to the next town. Then something made me change my mind. Call it fate or divine intervention or pure dumb luck, but I am grateful for it." "So am I," Clara said softly. They reached Fort Bridger late the following afternoon. It was a bustling place, full of trappers, traders, and emigrants preparing for the next leg of their journeys. They quickly located the marshal's office and explained the situation with Margaret Williams and her broken wagon. The marshal, a weathered man named Curtis Tanner, listened with a grim expression. "Robert Williams came through here yesterday," he said. "Said he needed to hire someone with wagon repair skills and would pay well for it. I directed him to a mechanic on the edge of town. Let me check if he is still here." Marshal Tanner returned 15 minutes later with troubling news. "The mechanic says Robert Williams never showed up. Given what you have told me about the location of the wagon and the fact that he has been gone over a day, I am concerned. There have been reports of Red Jack Murphy's gang operating in that area." Pierce's jaw tightened. "We need to get back there. Now." "I will gather some men and ride out with you," Marshal Tanner said. "If Red Jack is involved, you are going to need backup." They rode through the night, a group of 6 including Pierce, Clara, Marshal Tanner, and 3 deputized volunteers. Clara's muscles screamed in protest, and her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she did not complain. All she could think about was Tommy and Margaret and those 2 little children, alone and vulnerable. Dawn was breaking when they reached the campsite, and what they found made Clara's blood run cold. The camp was in disarray, the fire kicked out, supplies scattered everywhere. Margaret's rifle lay on the ground, the barrel bent at an odd angle as if someone had used it to beat something. But there was no sign of Margaret, her children, or Tommy. Pierce was off his horse before it had fully stopped, his gun drawn as he searched the area. "Tracks," he called out, pointing to the churned earth. "Multiple horses, and they were headed west." "That is toward Red Jack's suspected hideout," Marshal Tanner said grimly. "We need to move fast. If he has them, we do not have much time." They followed the tracks with grim determination, pushing their exhausted horses as hard as they dared. The trail led deeper into rough country, through narrow canyons and across rocky terrain that would have been treacherous in the best of circumstances. Clara's hands were white-knuckled on the reins, her heart pounding with fear for Tommy. The little boy had already lost so much. She could not bear the thought of him suffering anymore. It was mid-morning when they spotted smoke rising from a box canyon ahead. Marshal Tanner held up his hand, signaling everyone to stop. "That is it," he said quietly. "Ezekiel's map was right. They are holed up in there." "How do we approach?" Pierce asked. "Carefully," Marshal Tanner said. "We do not know how many men they have, and if they see us coming, they might use the hostages as leverage. I say we split up. Half of us create a distraction at the canyon entrance while the others circle around and try to find another way in." Pierce nodded. "Clara stays here with the horses." "Like hell I do," Clara said fiercely. "Tommy is in there and I am coming with you." "Clara, this is going to be dangerous," Pierce said, his voice tight with worry. "I know," Clara said, "but I am a good shot and you might need every gun you can get. I am not staying behind." Pierce looked like he wanted to argue, but Marshal Tanner interrupted. "She is right. We are outnumbered as it is. If she can shoot, we need her." Pierce's expression was tortured, but he finally nodded. "You stay close to me. If things go bad, you run. Promise me." "I promise," Clara said, though she had no intention of running if it meant leaving him behind. They divided into 2 groups. Marshal Tanner and 2 men would approach the canyon entrance openly, claiming to be travelers looking for directions. Meanwhile, Pierce, Clara, and the 3rd deputy would circle around and try to find another way into the canyon. The plan was risky, and Clara's heart was in her throat as they picked their way through the rocks. The sound of voices and laughter echoed from within the canyon, along with the smell of cooking meat and unwashed bodies. Pierce moved with the silence of a predator, and Clara did her best to match his stealth. They found a narrow crevice in the canyon wall that looked like it might lead to the interior. Pierce went first, squeezing through the tight space with his gun drawn. Clara followed, her breath coming in short gasps as the rock pressed in on all sides. The deputy brought up the rear, his face set in grim determination. They emerged onto a ledge that overlooked the canyon floor. Below them, Clara could see the gang's camp. There were at least a dozen men, rough and dangerous-looking, gathered around a fire. Off to one side, tied to a wagon wheel, were Margaret and her children. And there, huddled next to them with his hands bound, was Tommy. Clara felt a surge of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. Tommy was alive. They were all alive, though Margaret looked like she had been roughed up and the children were crying softly. "We need to wait for the marshal's signal," Pierce whispered. "When the shooting starts, we pick our targets and take them down as fast as possible. Aim for the men furthest from the hostages first. We cannot risk a stray bullet hitting them." Clara checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. Her hands were steady, though her heart was racing. She had never shot at a person before, never taken a life. But she would do whatever was necessary to save Tommy and the others. The signal came in the form of Marshal Tanner's voice echoing into the canyon. "Hello, the camp. We are peaceful travelers looking for directions to Fort Bridger." The gang members scrambled for their weapons, instantly alert. A man who could only be Red Jack Murphy stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick red beard and cold, dead eyes. "There are no peaceful travelers in these parts," Red Jack called back. "Turn around and ride out, or we will assume you are here to cause trouble." "Now that is no way to treat visitors," Marshal Tanner said, and Clara could hear the tension in his voice. "We just want to talk." "I am done talking," Red Jack snarled, and he drew his gun. Everything happened at once. Marshal Tanner and his men opened fire from the canyon entrance. Pierce, Clara, and the deputy began shooting from their perch. The canyon erupted into chaos, filled with the roar of gunfire and the screams of wounded men. Clara aimed carefully, just as her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. A gang member who had been moving toward the hostages went down with a cry. She worked the bolt action and fired again, taking down another man who was raising his rifle toward Pierce's position. The battle was fierce but brief. The gang members, caught in a crossfire and outnumbered by the element of surprise, quickly began to surrender. Red Jack himself fought like a cornered animal, but Marshal Tanner put a bullet through his shoulder, and he went down cursing and bleeding. When the smoke cleared, Pierce and Clara scrambled down from their perch and ran toward the hostages. Clara's hands shook as she cut through Tommy's bonds, and the boy threw his arms around her neck, sobbing with relief. "I knew you would come," Tommy cried. "I knew you would not leave us." "Never," Clara said fiercely, holding him tight. "We will never leave you." Pierce was helping Margaret and her children, speaking to them in soothing tones as he checked them for injuries. The children were terrified but unhurt. Margaret had bruises on her face and arms, but she was conscious and coherent. "My husband," Margaret said urgently, grabbing Pierce's arm. "Did you find my husband?" Pierce's expression was grim. He jerked his head toward a corner of the camp where several bodies lay covered with canvas. Marshal Tanner was over there, examining them with a sad expression. "No," Margaret whispered, her face crumpling. "No, no, no." Clara wanted to go to her to offer comfort, but Tommy would not let her go. She held the boy close and watched as Pierce gently helped Margaret to her feet and supported her as she walked over to identify her husband's body. The sound of Margaret's wails of grief echoed through the canyon, a sound that Clara knew she would hear in her nightmares for years to come. The aftermath was grim. Marshal Tanner arrested the surviving gang members, including Red Jack Murphy, who would face trial and likely hang for his crimes. They found evidence of dozens of robberies and at least 6 murders. There were also 3 other hostages being held in a makeshift prison at the back of the canyon. A young woman, an elderly man, and a teenage boy. All were malnourished and terrified but alive. Pierce organized the rescued hostages and helped them prepare for the journey back to Fort Bridger. Margaret Williams was in shock, moving through the motions mechanically as she tried to process the loss of her husband. Her children clung to her skirts, not fully understanding what had happened but sensing their mother's distress. What will happen to them? Clara asked Pierce quietly that night as they made camp on the trail back to the fort. Marshal Tanner says there is a church in Fort Bridger that helps widows and orphans, Pierce said. They will make sure Margaret and the children get to California safely and help them get settled. It is not much, but it is something. Clara nodded, her heart heavy. She had seen so much loss and suffering on this journey. Her father's betrayal, Tommy's parents murdered, and now Margaret's husband killed by violent men. It made her wonder how anyone survived in this brutal land. As if sensing her dark thoughts, Pierce reached over and took her hand. "We saved them," he said softly. "Tommy, Margaret, those other hostages. Because we chose to help, they are going to live. That matters, Clara. In a world full of darkness, we brought a little light. Hold on to that." Clara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence. "When we get to Oregon, what kind of life are we going to build?" Pierce smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "A peaceful one, if I have anything to say about it. I have 160 acres of good land near a town called Salem. There is a river running through it, plenty of timber for building, and soil that will grow just about anything. I have been working on a cabin when I am not scouting or hunting. It is small right now, just 3 rooms, but we can add on as needed." "As needed," Clara echoed, her cheeks warming. Pierce's gaze was steady and serious. "I am hoping you will marry me, Clara. Not right away, not until you are ready. But I want you to know that my intentions are honorable and my feelings are true. I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment you stood in that saloon and refused to give up hope, even when everything seemed lost." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Pierce, and yes, I will marry you, whenever you want, wherever you want." Pierce leaned in and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and passion and the hope of a better future. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling like fools. "What about Tommy?" Clara asked. "He has no one now. His parents are gone and there is no extended family." "I was thinking the same thing," Pierce said. "If you are willing, I would like to adopt him, raise him as our son. He is a good kid and he deserves a real family." "I cannot think of anything I would want more," Clara said, her heart full to bursting. "We will be a family. The 3 of us." They reached Fort Bridger 2 days later, and true to Marshal Tanner's word, the church community rallied around Margaret Williams and her children. A kind pastor's wife took them in, promising to help them join the wagon train headed to California. Margaret thanked Pierce and Clara through her tears, telling them that her husband would have been grateful for their efforts to save his family. Tommy was subdued as they said goodbye to Margaret's children, who he had befriended during their brief time together. But when Clara explained that he would be staying with them permanently, that they wanted to make him part of their family, his entire face lit up with joy. "Really?" he asked, looking between Clara and Pierce with disbelief. "You want to keep me?" "More than anything," Pierce said, ruffling Tommy's hair. "What do you say, son? Want to come to Oregon with us and help us build a ranch?" "Yes. Tommy shouted, throwing his arms around Pierce's waist. Yes, yes, yes. They restocked their supplies one more time and set out on the final leg of their journey to Oregon. The weather had turned cooler, with the first hints of autumn coloring the leaves. They traveled through stunning country, past mountains capped with early snow and through valleys carpeted with wildflowers. Tommy rode with Pierce most days, chattering endlessly about everything he saw and asking a million questions that Pierce answered with surprising patience. Clara watched them together and felt her heart swell with love. Pierce would be a wonderful father. He was firm but kind, teaching Tommy important skills while also making sure the boy had time to play and be a child. At night, they would sit around the campfire, and Pierce would tell stories about the constellations while Tommy gazed up at the stars with wonder. One evening, about a week from Fort Bridger, they camped beside a crystal-clear lake that reflected the surrounding mountains like a mirror. After dinner, Pierce took Clara's hand and led her down to the water's edge, leaving Tommy playing with a carved wooden horse by the fire. "I have been thinking," Pierce said, watching the last rays of sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "About us, about our future. And I realized I do not want to wait any more." "Wait for what?" Clara asked, though her heart was already racing. Pierce turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "To marry you. I know we talked about waiting until we got to Oregon, but every day I spend with you makes me more certain that you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. Clara Vaughn, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not someday, but soon, as soon as we can find a preacher." Clara laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, Pierce. I will marry you tomorrow if you can find someone to perform the ceremony." Pierce pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all of his love and commitment into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara felt like she was floating. "We will do it right," Pierce promised. "A proper wedding with witnesses and a real preacher. And then we will go to Oregon as man and wife, ready to start our life together." They reached the town of Boys 3 days later, a bustling settlement full of miners, traders, and families heading west. True to his word, Pierce found a preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, who agreed to perform the ceremony the next day. Clara used some of their remaining funds to buy a simple but pretty dress in a soft blue color that Pierce said matched her eyes. It was the first new dress she had owned in years, and she felt like a princess as she stood in front of the cracked mirror in their hotel room. The wedding was held in the small church at the edge of town. Tommy served as their witness, dressed in new clothes that Pierce had bought for him and looking scrubbed and serious. Clara walked down the aisle with no father to give her away, but she did not feel the loss. She was choosing this path freely, walking toward a man who loved and respected her, ready to build a future together. Pierce stood at the altar in his best shirt and vest, his hair freshly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. When Clara reached him, he took her hands and looked at her with such love that she felt tears prick at her eyes. Reverend Matthews performed a simple but beautiful ceremony. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, in good times and bad, for as long as they both lived. When Pierce slipped a simple gold band onto Clara's finger, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews declared with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Pierce did not need to be told twice. He pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her soundly, earning a cheer from the handful of townspeople who had gathered to watch the ceremony. Tommy clapped and whooped, clearly delighted by the whole affair. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, with Tommy sleeping in a separate room under the watchful eye of the innkeeper's wife. For the first time, Clara and Pierce had privacy, and they made the most of it. Pierce was gentle and patient, teaching Clara the mysteries of physical love with a tenderness that made her fall even deeper for him. Afterwards, they lay entwined in the narrow bed, talking softly about their dreams for the future. "I want a big family," Clara said, tracing patterns on Pierce's chest. "At least 4 children, maybe more. I want our home to be full of laughter and love." "That sounds perfect," Pierce murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We will raise good kids, teach them to be kind and strong. And we will make sure they never doubt that they are loved." "Tell me more about the land," Clara said. "Our land." Pierce's voice grew animated as he described the property. "The cabin is small right now, but it has good bones. There is a creek that runs year-round, perfect for fishing and irrigation. The soil is rich, and the growing season is long. I have been planting fruit trees, and there is plenty of wild game for hunting. The nearest town is Salem, about 5 miles east. It is a good community, full of people who help each other. I think you will like it there." "It sounds like paradise," Clara said softly. "It will be," Pierce promised, "because you will be there with me." They resumed their journey the next morning, now a family of 3. The ring on Clara's finger felt strange and wonderful, a constant reminder of the commitment they had made to each other. Pierce was more relaxed now, often reaching over to take Clara's hand as they rode side by side. Tommy seemed happier too, secure in the knowledge that he had a permanent home and parents who loved him. The landscape changed as they traveled north and west, the mountains giving way to rolling hills, and then to the lush valleys of Oregon Territory. The air was different here, cooler and damper, with a rich earthy smell. Rain came frequently, soft and steady, turning the world green and vibrant. Clara fell in love with Oregon immediately. It was so different from the harsh California mining country or the dusty plains they had crossed. This was a place where things could grow and thrive, where a person could put down roots and build something lasting. They reached Pierce's property on a crisp autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning gold and crimson. Clara sat on Daisy's back and stared at what would be her new home. The cabin was indeed small, but it was well built and sturdy, with a stone chimney and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport. The surrounding land was beautiful, with towering evergreen trees, open meadows, and the promised creek sparkling in the distance. "What do you think?" Pierce asked, and Clara could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I think it is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," Clara said honestly. "I think we are going to be very happy here." Pierce helped her down from her horse and they stood together, looking at the cabin that would be their home. Tommy had already run off to explore, his excited shouts echoing through the trees. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," Pierce said, and then he swept Clara up into his arms and carried her across the threshold, just as tradition demanded. The cabin was indeed small, with just 3 rooms as Pierce had said. But it was clean and well-maintained, with a sturdy table, a rope bed with a real mattress, and shelves lined with supplies. There was a stone fireplace for cooking and warmth, and windows that let in plenty of light. Clara could already imagine the improvements they would make, the curtains she would sew, the rugs she would weave. They spent the first few days settling in and preparing for winter. Pierce showed Clara and Tommy the land, teaching them where the best fishing spots were, where to find wild berries, and which paths led to town. They met some of their neighbors, friendly folk who welcomed them warmly and offered help getting established. Clara threw herself into making the cabin a proper home. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, hung curtains made from fabric she purchased in Salem, and started a garden plot where she would plant vegetables in the spring. Tommy helped enthusiastically, and Pierce built him a small bed in the third room that would serve as his bedroom. Winter came early to Oregon that year, bringing cold rain and occasional snow. But the cabin was warm and cozy, and Clara discovered that she loved the intimate domestic life. She cooked hearty meals on the fireplace, baked bread that made the whole cabin smell wonderful, and spent her evenings sewing or reading aloud from her mother's Bible while Pierce whittled and Tommy played with his growing collection of carved animals. On Christmas morning, Clara woke to find that Pierce had fashioned a surprise. He had cut down a small evergreen tree and set it up in the corner of the main room, decorating it with paper chains that Tommy had made and small candles that cast a warm glow. Under the tree were simple gifts: a new dress for Clara that Pierce had secretly commissioned from a seamstress in Salem, a real store-bought toy horse for Tommy, and for Pierce, a warm scarf that Clara had knitted in secret. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Tommy declared, hugging his new horse with delight. "Mine too," Clara agreed, looking at Pierce with love shining in her eyes. "Mine three," Pierce said, pulling both of them into a group embrace. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Pierce. When she finally shared the news one evening after Tommy had gone to bed, Pierce's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around, and then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder and disbelief in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Pierce said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I never thought I would have this, Clara. A wife, a home, a family. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted." Tommy was thrilled when they told him he was going to be a big brother. He immediately became protective of Clara, insisting on helping her with every task and scolding Pierce if he thought his adoptive father was letting Clara work too hard. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara blossomed under Pierce's devoted care and Tommy's constant attention. As her belly grew, Pierce added onto the cabin, building a fourth room that would serve as a nursery. He crafted a beautiful wooden cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth as silk and decorating it with intricate carvings of animals and flowers. The baby came on a warm day in September, delivered by a midwife from Salem with Pierce and Tommy anxiously waiting outside. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara thought she might not survive it. But finally, after hours of labor, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a girl," the midwife announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant in Clara's arms. A healthy baby girl. Pierce was allowed in moments later, and the look on his face when he saw his daughter for the first time was one Clara would treasure forever. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger, and she immediately grasped it, holding on with surprising strength. "She is perfect," Pierce whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Clara, she is absolutely perfect." They named her Sarah Jane Vaughn after Pierce's mother and Clara's. Sarah had her father's gray eyes and her mother's delicate features, and from the very beginning, she had both of her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Tommy was an excellent big brother, gentle and protective with the baby. He would sit for hours holding Sarah while she slept, singing to her in his high, clear voice. Clara watched her family with a heart so full of love it sometimes felt like it might burst. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Pierce worked the land, planting crops and raising livestock. Clara managed the household and cared for Sarah while also helping with the outdoor work when she could. Tommy went to the small school in Salem 3 days a week, learning to read and write with impressive speed. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Sarah took her first steps, spoke her first words, grew from a baby into a lively toddler. Clara became pregnant again when Sarah was 2, delivering a healthy baby boy they named William, after the man who had saved Pierce all those years ago in New York. 2 years after that came twin girls, Anna and Elizabeth, who filled the cabin with chaos and laughter. Pierce expanded the cabin again and again, until it was a proper house with 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a sitting room where the family gathered in the evenings. The ranch prospered, and they became well-respected members of the community. Pierce served on the town council, and Clara organized a women's group that raised money for the school and church. Tommy grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his adoptive father. When he turned 18, he announced his intention to claim his own land adjacent to the ranch and build a house there. Pierce gave him his blessing and helped him build a small cabin. A year later, Tommy married a sweet girl named Hannah from town, and they soon had children of their own. Clara and Pierce watched their family grow with wonder and gratitude. They had 5 children together, and Tommy had given them 6 grandchildren by the time Clara turned 40. The house was always full of noise and activity, with children running in and out, grandchildren visiting, and neighbors stopping by for coffee and conversation. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Pierce took Clara back to the spot by the lake where he had proposed. They had left the children and grandchildren in Tommy's capable care for a rare weekend alone together. "You ever regret it?" Pierce asked as they sat watching the sunset paint the water gold and pink. "Marrying a rough cowboy instead of someone more refined?" Clara laughed and took his hand, the same hand that had torn her name from that ledger so many years ago. "Not for a single moment. You saved me, Pierce. Not just from Silas Crenshaw, but from a life without love, without purpose. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." "I was the one who was saved," Pierce said softly. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to live, Clara, how to love. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat together as the stars began to appear, comfortable in the silence that comes from 2 decades of marriage. Clara thought about that terrified girl standing in the Golden Nugget Saloon, certain her life was over. She thought about the long journey to Oregon, the dangers they had faced, the love that had grown between them with every mile. "I would do it all again," Clara said. "Every hard moment, every scary decision. If it meant ending up here with you, I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Pierce pulled her close and kissed her temple. "As would I, my love. As would I." They stayed by the lake for 3 days, reconnecting and remembering the early days of their love. When they returned home, they found the house decorated with ribbons and flowers. The whole community had gathered for a surprise anniversary celebration, with tables laden with food and a fiddler ready to play. As Clara danced with Pierce under the stars, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, she marveled at how far they had come. From a saloon in Hangtown where she had been sold like property, to this moment of joy and community and love. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Clara and Pierce grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered and refined by shared experiences and mutual respect. On a warm spring morning when Clara was 65 and Pierce was 68, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Sarah had come to visit with her own grandchildren, and the house was once again full of life and laughter. "We did all right, did we not?" Pierce said, his voice still strong despite his years. "We did more than all right," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "We built something beautiful. A family, a legacy. Love that will last long after we are gone." Pierce turned to look at her, and Clara saw the same intensity in those gray eyes that had captured her heart so many years ago. "I love you, Clara Vaughn. From the moment I saw you in that saloon to this very second, you have been the best thing in my life." "And you have been mine," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for tearing my name from that book. Thank you for setting me free." "Thank you for choosing to stay," Pierce replied. They sat together in the comfortable silence of long companionship, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren played and laughed around them, a testament to the love that had started in the most unlikely of places. Clara thought about that day in Hangtown, how a stranger had walked into a saloon and changed her entire world. She thought about the journey to Oregon, the challenges they had overcome, the love that had sustained them through it all. Life had not always been easy. They had faced hardships, losses, and struggles that had tested them in every way. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. They had built a life filled with purpose and meaning, raised children who would carry on their values, and created a home where love was the foundation of everything. As the day drew on, and their family eventually departed for their own homes, Pierce and Clara remained on the porch, reluctant to let go of the perfect peace of the moment. Tommy stopped by before heading home, now a gray-haired grandfather himself, but still the same caring boy they had rescued all those years ago. "Thank you," he said, embracing them both. "For everything. For saving me, for raising me, for showing me what a real family looks like. My children and their children exist because of your kindness. I will never forget that." After he left, Clara and Pierce went inside their home, the house that love had built. They prepared dinner together as they had done thousands of times before, moving around each other with the ease of long practice. They ate by the fire, talking about the day and making plans for tomorrow. That night, as they lay in bed together, Clara reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From being sold to pay a saloon tab to building a legacy of love that would span generations. All because one man had chosen to do the right thing, to see her worth when others saw only a commodity. "Pierce," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, my love. If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Pierce was quiet for a moment, and then she felt his arm tighten around her. "Not a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Clara smiled and closed her eyes, feeling safe and loved and complete. They had started their story in the dust and desperation of a gold-rush town, two broken people looking for hope. They had found it in each other, and in finding it, they had built something that would last forever. The love that began when Pierce Vaughn paid Clara's debt, and tore her name from that ledger, had grown into something magnificent. It had sustained them through 20 years of marriage, helped them raise a large and loving family, and created a home that would be filled with love for generations to come. As Clara drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she offered up a prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for true love, for the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been sold to pay a saloon tab, but a cowboy had settled it and given her the most precious gift of all, freedom. And with that freedom, she had chosen love, chosen family, chosen a life worth living. It was more than enough. It was everything. And in the morning, they would wake up together and begin another day of their beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life. Because that is what love does. It transforms the ordinary into something magical, turns strangers into soulmates, and builds forever from the most unlikely beginnings. Their story was one of redemption and hope, of courage and commitment. It was a story that would be told to their descendants for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way. That one act of kindness can change the trajectory of a life. That freedom given freely is the greatest gift one person can offer another. Pierce and Clara Vaughn had lived their love story fully, holding nothing back, cherishing every moment. And as they grew old together in the house that love built, surrounded by the family they had created, they knew without a doubt that they had found what so many people spend their whole lives searching for: a love that was true, deep, and everlasting. Their legacy was not measured in gold or land, though they had both. It was measured in the love they had shared, the lives they had touched, and the family they had nurtured. It was measured in kindness given and received, in sacrifices made willingly, in joys celebrated together. And it all started with a cowboy walking into a saloon, seeing a woman in need, and choosing to help. From that single moment of compassion grew a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of human kindness and the transformative nature of true love. As the years continued to roll by, Clara and Pierce remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by over 80 descendants, a testament to the love that had started in Hangtown, California, and had flourished in the fertile soil of Oregon. When Pierce passed away at the age of 79, Clara held his hand and whispered her love one final time. He died peacefully in the bed they had shared for over 50 years, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that he had lived a good life and loved well. Clara lived for 3 more years, cared for devotedly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her final days in the house Pierce had built, surrounded by the love they had created together. On a quiet summer evening, she passed away in her sleep, a peaceful smile on her face. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch. Under 2 oak trees that Pierce had planted the year they arrived in Oregon. Their headstones were simple, bearing only their names, the dates they lived, and a single line that summed up their remarkable journey: love redeemed, love sustained, love eternal. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a living monument to Pierce and Clara's love. Their descendants continued to tell their story, passing down the tale of how a cowboy had walked into a saloon and changed the course of history for an entire family. How one act of courage and compassion had rippled forward through time, creating waves of love and kindness that touched hundreds of lives. It was a love story set in the Wild West, born from desperation and tragedy, nurtured through hardship and joy, and ultimately triumphant in its enduring legacy. It was a reminder that love is always worth fighting for, that freedom is precious, and that the choices we make can echo through eternity. Pierce and Clara Vaughn had started as strangers brought together by circumstance. They had become partners in survival, then friends, then lovers, then spouses and parents and grandparents. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their story was complete, their circle closed. From the moment Pierce tore Clara's name from that ledger to the moment they were laid to rest together, they had lived a life of purpose and meaning. They had loved deeply, laughed often, worked hard, and never took a single day together for granted. And in the end, that is all any of us can hope for: to love and be loved in return, to build something lasting, to leave the world a little better than we found it. Pierce and Clara Vaughn had done all of that and more. Their love story, born in the dust of a California mining town, had bloomed into something beautiful and eternal. It was a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. It was a love that conquered all obstacles, endured all trials, and ultimately triumphed. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, hope remains. That freedom is worth fighting for. That love, true love, really can conquer all. And somewhere in heaven, if such a place exists, Pierce and Clara Vaughn dance together still. Forever young, forever in love, forever free. Their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure in the hearts and lives of all those they touched. This was their story. This was their love. This was their happily ever after.